Friday's Aaron Torres pod, we talked a lot about the Penn State Auburn game, but obviously most of it was from the Penn State perspective. Penn State walks into Jordan-Hare Stadium. Penn State is a slight favorite, which was a little surprising to me at the time. In hindsight, it shouldn't have been. And Penn State walked out with an absolute dominant victory. 41-12 was the final score. Of course, if it was just about the win, we wouldn't have necessarily talked about it. But more importantly, it was how the win went down, right? Because when you look at Penn State, but when you also look at Auburn, even in the darkest days last year under Brian Harsin, they were still a team that could compete physically. As a matter of fact, that was maybe their only strength, was literal strength. Top 30 run defense last year, really strong run defense to start this year. And the one thing I think you could always count on from the Brian Harsin perspective was, do they have the skill position talent? Do they have the quarterback play? I don't know, but nobody's going to out-tough you. Only that's exactly what happened on Saturday for Penn State. 6.5 yards per carry. The freshman Nick Singleton, 100-plus yards, about 12.5 yards per carry in that game. And Penn State didn't just beat them. They absolutely annihilated them and punked them at the line of scrimmage. And so we talked a lot about the Penn State perspective on Monday. And I do think it's important to transition to the Auburn perspective here on Tuesday's show. Because while you guys and girls know I don't love to speculate on jobs and this and that and the other thing, and I certainly don't like the way that a small segment of the Auburn fan base treated Brian Harsin last year during that craziness in January and February, what I would also say is what I said on Friday's show. That Saturday really was basically a must-win game for Auburn. Now, it wasn't literally a must-win game, but when you're Brian Harsin and you're on the hot seat and you know there is a certain level that you have to compete at, there is a certain number of wins that you have to have, it kind of says Penn State at home is probably a game you got to get, right? You're not going to beat Georgia. You're not going to beat Alabama. People will forgive you. But to get to the win total that you have to get to, you got to beat Penn State. And if you don't, it makes everybody look at the schedule and say, well, who exactly can Auburn beat? And I think that's how we're kind of looking at the schedule right now, right? They do get Missouri this week, but after that, they play LSU at home. LSU all of a sudden looks a lot better than they did. And then on top of that, don't forget, you got 3 straight ranked opponents to follow that: Georgia, Arkansas, Ole Miss. You have a Mississippi State team that beat you last year. You have a Texas A&M team that beat you last year, and you have Alabama to finish the season. And so it's not looking good for Brian Harsin. And again, if you can't beat Penn State at home, it doesn't bode well for the rest of your season. And really, it is time that we can still talk about Auburn and the Brian Harsin perspective, but we also probably should start thinking about what is next for Auburn, because I don't think this guy is going to survive the year. He might not even survive until the middle of the year. So with that said, let's talk about it. Let's talk about their future. And let me say this about the future, not the present, but the future of Auburn football. I believe that there is really only one guy that they should call to take this job. Now, there are other candidates. We'll get to them in a minute. But there's only one guy that I believe they should call, that I believe would be the perfect fit, that would check all the boxes, and that I really do believe, could get Auburn competing at the highest level. That man, he goes by Coach Prime. I'm talking about Deion Sanders, head coach, Jackson State University. And yes, I believe he is the guy Auburn should call when Brian Harsin is inevitably let go. Let me explain why. Okay, so first of all, let me say this. There are other good candidates out there. Let's not pretend like they aren't. I know that there's a big clamoring in the Auburn fan base right now for Lane Kiffin. I guess what I would say is I'll believe it when I see it that Lane Kiffin is leaving Ole Miss for Auburn. It has obviously happened before. Tommy Tuberville about 25 years ago was the Ole Miss coach, leaves for Auburn. But historically, you just don't see many coaches leave within conference, leave within division. I don't know that Lane Kiffin is going to do that at this exact time, especially since, again, it appears as though he has Ole Miss rolling once again, even after losing everything from a year ago. Hugh Freeze would be another logical name. If Auburn went and got Hugh Freeze, friend of the Aaron Torres pod, I would have absolutely no problems with it at all. I think he'd do great there. But I do believe Coach Prime is the guy for a couple different reasons. First of all, I've talked about this before. I think I mentioned it when Jackson State, Deion Sanders got the #1 player in America to commit to them last year. But he's a real coach, right? Like, I think there's this perception, and I think we've seen it maybe more in college basketball than college football. Sometimes when these high-profile guys come into a job, they just don't really know what they're signing up for, what they're getting into. Are they fully committed 2 feet in? We talked about it with Herm Edwards on Monday's show. Making a lot of money doing TV. Are you really willing to get down, grind, work hard, recruit 365 days a year? A sophomore wants to take an unofficial visit and come take a picture with you. You got to be on campus. Well, there's a lot of coaches coming that have had a ton of success, in other areas of football or basketball that aren't willing to put in the work. Deion Sanders is willing to put in the work. Okay, I said it. They did when Deion got the job at Jackson State. They did a documentary on Barstool Sports. So he works for Barstool Sports, but he also coaches at Jackson State. They did a documentary, and I came away so impressed by Deion Sanders. Okay, again, this isn't a guy that's trying this out or doing it, or maybe I'm going to 1 foot in, 1 foot out. No, this guy is fully committed. If you watch that documentary, you can see he understands how to coach at the highest level, how to run a program, how to hire staff, how to deal with players. There was kind of that nice balance between coaching them up, being tough, but not impossible. I mean, if you watch that documentary, it is impossible not to come away impressed by Coach Prime and the coach that he is. And I do think it's having an effect on the field, by the way, where Coach Prime has been awesome. Deion Sanders has been awesome as the head coach at Jackson State the last 2 years. Year one, it's COVID, it's weird, it's whatever. Last year, did you see what Jackson State did? 11-2 overall. One of their losses was to an FBS team, and it was a close loss, 12-7 to Louisiana Monroe. So you take out the FBS game where the other team has more players, more scholarships, more this, more that. Deion Sanders went 11-1 last year. This year, currently sitting at 3-0 with 3 dominant wins, top 10 offense, top 10 defense in college football, and just taking care of business early. Put up 66 points in their first game, put up 50-plus points the other day, and you're talking about a team that in 2 of their 3 games so far this season have won by 35-plus points. So 11-2 last year, it does not feel like he's missing a beat. I'm just telling you, if you haven't watched the Barstool documentary, go watch it. This guy's a real coach. He knows how to build a program. He knows how to build an organization. This isn't something he's doing for fun to try. He is very much committed to Jackson State and to the building process there. More importantly, though, the reason why I believe that Auburn should go hire Deion Sanders, he's already proven to do something that Brian Harsin has yet to prove to do. He's gone head-to-head with Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Mike Norvell, Dabo Swinney, pretty much everybody in college football. And he has gone ahead and won recruiting battles with all of the best coaches in college football, right? And so what I would say in general about this job or pretty much any job, and I say it all the time, at the end of the day, you can talk about this guy, this, that, the other thing. At the end of the day, it's all about recruiting, right? I keep referencing the Nick Saban quote from Colin Cowherd about 2-3 weeks ago. Cowherd asked him, Coach, you're 71 years old. Why are you so excited? Why are you so passionate about recruiting at this age? Why do you still do it? And he said, I learned a long time ago, it's really hard to coach bad players to play good. And that has always stuck with me. And if you are not bought in on recruiting, and if you don't understand how to sell yourself to recruits at the highest level, I just don't think you're going to win anywhere no matter what. You can't out-develop Kirby Smart and Nick Saban when they're both elite developers and they have better players with you to start. So to me, it does start with coaching, development, and recruiting. And as I said, Deion Sanders has proven he can go head-to-head with those guys and win. We all know about Travis Hunter, #1 high school player in America, committed to Florida State, decommits, signs with Jackson State. What I don't think a lot of people realize, though, is that Jackson State actually got another top 100 player last year, a 4-star wide receiver named Kevin Coleman, who was ranked number 56 in the high school class of 2022. Why is that important? It's because you can argue that Travis Hunter is the outlier, right? Like you're just not going to sign the #1 player in America very often. But what is interesting is Deion signed a 4-star wide receiver that had offers from Alabama, from Miami, from all these major programs. That player who people have forgotten about, don't even remember Jackson State signing him. He's actually ranked higher than any player that Brian Harsin has signed since he got to Auburn. The 2023 class for Auburn right now, and I understand Brian Harsin's recruiting while on the hot seat. The 2023 class has 0 top 100 players. Again, Deion signed 2 top 60 players a year ago. 0 top 100 players in the class of 2023. 2022 had 0 top 100 players for Brian Harsin. And 2021, the winter that he took over, had 2 top 100 players, neither ranked better than the top 2 players that Deion Sanders signed. One of them committed under Gus Malzahn and stayed. The other one committed late after Jeremy Pruitt was fired at Tennessee. So if Jeremy Pruitt doesn't get fired at Tennessee, we're basically talking about 1 top 100 player that Brian Harsin will likely sign in his first 3 recruiting classes. And oh, by the way, that kid left to go play for Gus Malzahn at Central Florida. And so when I look at Deion, it's a simple question. If this guy can recruit at this level at Jackson State, and this level is certainly not the level to beat Nick Saban, beat Kirby Smart, beat Alabama, beat Georgia. But if he can sign 5 stars, high 4 stars at Jackson State, can you imagine what he could do at Auburn? Because I think he'd kill it there. And what it goes back to, in my opinion, is something that I've talked about on this show so often over the last couple of years. I think we have this misnomer about recruiting, and it's about this and it's about that. And I do think, like, geographically, it is important, right? And there's always going to be schools that have inherent advantages. LSU is always going to have advantages. USC is going to have advantages in the Pac-12 that Oregon State doesn't have. But at the end of the day, kids really want to go someplace where they can do 2 things. They want to win at the highest level, and they want to be developed for the NFL. And that is what's so intriguing to me about Deion Sanders at Auburn. Can you imagine? He's already going into homes and beating Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Mike Norvell, whoever for players. Can you imagine if he's now in the SEC and he has the SEC Saturdays to sell to recruits as well? On top of that, so this is basically a sales pitch. Come here. You're going to play against the best. We're going to build a program to beat Nick Saban. We're going to build a program to beat Alabama. We're going to build a program to beat Georgia. And then on top of that, I'm going to develop you for the NFL, because that's already what he is selling at Jackson State, and that is already resonating. He's saying, look, we have a ton of guys that came from the NFL, a ton of guys that have worked in the NFL, a ton of guys that have played in the NFL, headlined by me, who is literally an NFL Hall of Famer. If it's working at Jackson State, imagine what he could do at Auburn with everything around him. Finally, what I would say, why I like the Deion Sanders hire so much, it gives Auburn an identity, right? And I was thinking about this in lead up to the segment. Has Auburn really had an identity since Cam Newton left? Like, they've had highs and they've had lows, and they had the year that they, played for a national championship when everything broke right, kicked 6, and the prayer at Jordan Hare. Those were the 2 wins over Georgia and Alabama. But if they really had an identity, it's up, it's down, it's this, it's that, it's craziness on the field, it's craziness off the field. Gus Malzahn's doing all sorts of quirky stuff, and he's winning just enough games where they can't fire him, and then they fire him. Then they bring in Brian Harsin, and they're trying to be physical, but they're not good enough, and they don't have this, and they're not recruiting. Deion immediately brings an identity to Auburn. I think he does bring a cool factor as well, right? Like, I don't think, like, cool doesn't, I don't know. I do think it doesn't matter if you're not recruiting well, but I think he's going to recruit well because of what I just said. Come here, be cool, prepare for the NFL. I'm going to wear sunglasses in press conferences, and we're going to kick butt on game day. And so I look at all the factors. I look at the fact that he's proven he can build a program at the lower level. And I know Auburn fans, they don't want to take a chance on another guy from the lower level. Deion ain't Brian Harsin, okay? Brian Harsin came from Boise State, and I would tell you this, and I said it at the time. Boise State was built. He kind of kept that thing steady, but it was going in the wrong direction by the time he left. Deion has built a program out of nowhere. He is recruiting at the highest level. And I'm telling you, you put him at Auburn with SEC facilities, with SEC resources, with an ability to pay great assistant coaches, with an ability to sell, we are the pathway to the NFL. I think it would work. I think it'd be a home run. Now, again, if you can get Lane Kiffin, probably get Lane Kiffin. If not, you go hard after Deion. Now, the question with Deion, ironically, is, would he want this job? Well, is he still going to wait for Florida State? I don't think Florida State is going to open, but he has said very vocally he loves being at Jackson State. He wants to stay there. I think it'd be tough for him to turn down the SEC. In my opinion, that is a call you have to make if you are Auburn.